you've certainly taken the world by storm here, especially during the pandemic. Do you ever like look back though and think like of the times you're like, yeah, this is probably it for me. Like you have those moments in those shows where you're like, if I make it another week in this business, it'll be a miracle.
Yeah, of course. I felt that way last night. I had just a bad crowd. It's amazing how yeah, it's funny you say taking the world by storm. I'm like, I feel like the world has taken me by storm. I'm just like, I'm performing in places that aren't built for stand up. You just have to I feel like we just are trying to keep surviving until things go back to normal. But I've been doing these like weird tent shows, kind of, I'm trying to find venues that make people in New York feel safe, so
Right.
they're distance. It's just not good for comedy.
Yeah, and I don't think people totally get that if they're not in the business of like I think they see things happening and they think nothing has changed, but I mean, there was a time when you probably couldn't have been paid enough to do an outdoor show in some of these
Yeah.
circumstances. And now you're like sending avails, you know.
Yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, it's last night. I've been doing these shows a few nights a week. I kind of just I just promote them, get my people in there. It's in a restaurant, but it's a greenhouse type setup, so it's like high ceilings, the windows open, so there's an airflow. I think people feel safe in there. But it's connected to a restaurant, and they'll just be playing like shitty music, and I have to be like, "Hey, can you turn down Usher? I'm trying to follow my dreams here. Sorry."
Yeah.
So. Uh, yeah, it's tough when it takes you back to when you only did shitty gigs. So in a weird way, it's kind of been like, yeah, well, I'll never take like a mediocre road gig for granted again.
Right, right. It is crazy how now when you go into a club on the road or something and you see like 30% capacity, like, there was probably a point where like, man, this sucks. It's like 30%, that's all we can fill. And now you're like, we're in. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Well, I can't wait to get back to it. It's really it's been a long year. It's funny, I had a friend check in on me last night and she was like, "Man, I can't, it feels like it's been 10 days or 10 years. I can't even tell since I saw you last time." And I was like, it's been a year. You know how long it's been.
Yeah, right.
But I get that feeling, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a friend that like you went to high school with and you're like, man, I haven't seen you in forever. And it was like, we go to the same restaurant, we see each other all the
Yeah.
time. We
Well, that's what I miss. Those friends you just kind of like, you're like, well, I don't make like plans to hang with this person, but I like seeing this person.
right.
You
Yeah,
just see him at the
exactly.
cellar. Like there's people that I don't like Ted. You just mentioned Ted Alexandro before this. And it's like the Ted's a guy I never like hung out with, but if I saw Ted, I like chatting with Ted. He's a great guy. So people like that. And now there's other people who are like, well, we should like do a Zoom hang. And you're like, fuck, you can't weasel out of a Zoom hang.
Yeah.
Like you could have like made an excuse. Like I can't make it to Brooklyn on Wednesday at 5, but you can't be like, I'm never available at a computer. You can't just get out of that. So it's
Right.
tough.
Yeah, it sucks, man. You came up in New York, right?
Hmm.
So, I don't think I did not start in New York like a lot of comics. And I don't think that people have a real appreciation of what it means to start in New York and go through some of just the ringers you probably went through to get stage time. I mean, bringer shows, forget bringer shows, just like total ambush bar
Yeah.
shows and like restaurant shows. Are there any that come to mind of like
Yeah, of
just
course.
absolute ludicrous
Well, you
setups?
said ambush shows. People, I don't know how inside baseball this podcast is, but I mean, people, yeah, you're literally ruining people's dinners. I mean, you'd go up there and you'd get mad at them, like, "What's your problem?" And they're like, We're on a date. We didn't know there'd be a comedy show." I mean, it's literally ambushing them with comedy.
Right.
It's the worst. Like, you're not better than a guy who comes. You're worse than someone who comes on a subway car reading poetry or whatever or playing music because these people are paying for dinner and you're ruining their night. But that's how desperate you are for. I remember I did an ambush show. Phoebe Robinson used to run a show at Manchester Pub in Midtown. It was a terrible show. Everything about the show sucked. Even the nachos, they came with like American cheese. Like everything sucked about this gig. And I remember there's 4 people in the crowd, and I'm like, oh, here we go, you know? And they didn't want comedy. And I go up and I realize I know these 4 people, and they I went to Tulane for a year and a half in New Orleans, and they all were like, you know, frat boys at Tulane. And I told them, they were like, I'm gonna go pursue my dream in New York. I'm gonna be a comic, and this is where they see me. I just bombed for 4 people I knew. It
Oh
sucked.
my God.
And I could
Oh
just see
my.
like they just pitied me. It was the worst. I don't mind bombing, but when it's bombing for people, you're like, I'm gonna be somebody, and they're like, you're not. We just saw you bomb. So that was rough. And yeah, it's tough. I think like that weekend I just opened for Jim Jeffries at like sold out shows all weekend. I had a blast. And then that's where they see me, and you're like, God damn it.
Dude, there is nothing more extreme than the roller coaster of this business of being like sometimes in one night, you know, I'm sure you've had it where you're like, you come off a killer show and you're like, I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna get one more in. And
Yeah.
then you do it and you're like, should have went to bed, you
Yeah,
know?
you get greedy. You're like, yeah, if I got that pop, I can do even better. Yeah, you gotta know when to leave. That's a big part of this too, is leaving one and more, as they say. But yeah, I mean, shit, I've opened for Amy Schumer in arenas, and I think the next night I did 4 people at the Village Lantern and ate shit. And you're like, that's kind of the cool thing about comedy. It's like there's that much of a range. That's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah. It's pretty I mean, every comic has stolen Seinfeld's line, I think of it. It's justice, you know, it's the only
Yeah,
true form of justice. Uh, do you mind if we talk about the Naples story a little bit?
sure.
So if people haven't heard it, it's on your special that you did on YouTube.
That's
I
one of
got
those
the
bits. Like if I sometimes when I'm working on new shit, I'll say throw out a topic at me just because I'm you know I don't have enough new jokes, and if sometimes I feel like I can riff a couple at least premises if I go back
yeah
and listen. And if I say scream anything out, it's either Naples or the White Knight that people yell out.
yeah yeah. So that club that you are at, I think most comics would know as being just a brutal.
Hell gig
Uh,
for sure.
yeah. But you had an interesting experience there, and for people that have heard the story, you know, it's they know it. But for people that haven't, can you set it up a little bit, and then let's really dive into how that felt, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I don't even know there was so much that happened that week, so I don't even know which part you're referring to. I
Well,
get
there's the guy, you know,
the
the
old
guy
guy.
that shouts out, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, they got me at a breaking point. I think that was like the last show. And I'd been bombed like 5 or 6 years. And the weird thing is, like, I had some of my people there, but a lot of not my people there. So I think they were in shock. The people that came to see me, they were like, how is he doing this badly? Like, I was, it's funny how quickly you go through material when it's not going well. And like, we'd see that at these outdoor shows lately. You know, if you're not getting those laughs at last, you just have to keep hammering them. And that's not really my style. I like to kind of let a joke breathe for a second and just kind of let it hit. And I don't talk super quickly on stage. So I had to just go quickly to get any momentum there, doing old jokes, bombing. I was getting a little bit buried by my opener too, who just passed away, Eric Myers, really funny guy. He was high energy, so he was a tough follow. And he was just a road dog. He was like a fucking Florida murderer.
Yeah.
So it was not only did the crowd hate me, but they liked him better than me for sure. And yeah, I just couldn't get shit going. It was at this, I think it was like the last night, this old guy, I just said like, oh, I can't wait to get the fuck out of here or something. And some old guy said, well, you're still here. It was like it was a perfect voice too. And I said, yeah, well, I'll be gone tomorrow and you'll be in a casket. You know, I said something like that. And he goes, you'll have to put me there. And I said, well, that's not how time works, you know? And, there was more. I mean, it was, the best part of that was the kid yelling out at the end, grandpa, enough.
Right.
Like this was this kid's grandpa who was just shithouse wasted. And that's what they were, just old drunk. Like, no, Naples is not a place that's you know, I wouldn't call them lovers of the arts. It's a weird place for a comedy club. They're just kind of rich, vacant, or vapid, whatever you want to call them, people. And yeah, I didn't really, I don't think I'll ever be back. Although I did recently think like it would be pretty dead. People know how much I hate Naples now to the point that like it would be pretty funny to film a special there.
Yeah, that would be almost
I think people would come from Miami and Tampa and all those other surrounding parts just to be a part of that because it's such a funny story.
and just
So
to
I think maybe I get
see
some of my
how it would
people.
go. Yeah, just like almost wanting to see it like, will this go off the rails? You know?
I'll make my peace with Naples. Maybe that's what it is, or it'll get worse. Who knows? You
Right.
know?
Well, I think you bring up so the story. If people don't know it, they know it now. But inside that story, you say like, you know, I they caught me at my breaking point, and I think as comics, you feel that sometimes where you're like, am I about to cry on stage? Am I about to fight? Like you sort of have that
Yeah,
rush of emotion that almost you lose control of yourself. You know?
yeah. If you don't snap, you haven't done enough sets. I mean, by just the numbers, you're gonna get a crowd that pushes you to the brink. And if you're doing enough sets and you're doing the road long enough, and there's a lack of respect that any human loses it at. And I think with comics, like sometimes people will say it's brave, and I'm always like, oh, shut the fuck up. And they're like, comedy, you're the bravest person I know. I'm like, what do you do? Navy SEAL. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool,
Yeah.
whatever, right? But so I laugh when people say what we do is brave, but I think it's more that like we are okay with. I mean, think of Rodney Dangerfield. I get no respect. That's stand up. It's like,
Right.
it's yeah, in his life, but it's stand up. You get no respect, right? So I think there's a certain point where people just treat you on this subhuman level, whether they're on their phone or ignoring you or talking. And yeah, it's pretty common to be like, fuck all you motherfuckers and just lose it. And that was Naples for me. Of course, there have been others, but Naples is one. I've had comparable gigs for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think like the worst it's gotten where you're like, I gotta get out of here? Has it ever gotten to the
Well,
point where like I need to find a back door?
multiple times for sure. Yeah. I remember I used to work the door at Broadway Comedy Club and they'd let me go on stage. And one night I'm just not doing great, but this guy, I'm doing like fine, but not. And this one guy keeps heckling me. He's like, "You have shitty pants." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure they were shitty, you know." Like I've heard worse heckles. He got me, but then I
Yeah.
kind of go at him and I start getting him, and then I go, "Ah, you're fucking trash." I just said you're like human garbage or whatever, and he's like, "What did you say?" Apparently, I hit a nerve. He gets up, and I'm like, "Oh fuck, he's nuts." All right, and the staff like me because I worked the door there and I was friendly with all of them. So it's like these tough, these tough, sassy Latino waitresses just like barricading the stage so he can't get to me.
Oh my
And
God.
and then I just hear and I'm like, oh, come on. And he just nails me with a loogie right in the chest. And
Ah,
yeah, and then he gets thrown out. His girlfriend's like, "What? Like, come on, not again!" Like he's done this shit at. I'm sure he's done this shit before. Maybe not at comedy shows, but this is who this guy is. Like,
right.
like, come on. So he gets tossed, and you can't just go back into material. I tried. He left, and I was like, "So dating's weird." You know.
Oh my God.
The crowd felt so bad for me. They're like, we just watched a guy get completely humiliated. And
Yeah.
yeah, that sucked. So that was one. Another one, Bridgeport, Connecticut, years ago. So, all right, I'll actually be back there in late April. It's my first gig back. So of course this makes sense. Bridgeport, Connecticut it's a tough part of Connecticut. Connecticut's such a weird state because you get like Greenwich and then you get like blue collar. It's like 15 minutes away, right?
Yeah.
That's how Connecticut works. Like 15 minutes, you're like nicest area I've ever seen. Then 15 minutes later, you're like, I'm gonna get murdered. You know what I mean? So
Right. Right.
uh I'm in this place years ago. It's called the Bijou Theater, and it's a cool little venue. It's like a type of place where they play old movies. You walk in, there's a big Casablanca poster, and it's pretty neat. It's pretty cool. And these guys want to book me, and they said, "Hey, can we can we just come see you in the city first? We're really excited to have you. And I said, yeah, sure. So they come see me at Eastville Comedy Club, which at the time was on 4th Street. And it was rocking on weekends. Eastville was great. So they watched me just annihilate. They watched, like, it was hard to not murder there, you know?
Yeah.
So I had this great set and they were like, well, if you do that well here, we can't imagine what you're going to do in Connecticut. And I'm kind of want to be like, let's not blow the illusion, but I don't think they get how this works. So I said, all right, yeah. And then he was like, this is my friend, we call him the Muscle. And I was like, the Muscle, what the fuck? Like, all right, hey, Muscle, and he's like, well, yeah, I'm the Muscle of the group. And he kind of had like an edge to him, like, whatever. So they were like a little annoying, but but I could tell they were like nice too. So I was like, all right, whatever. I just want the gig, just want the work. And then I get to the venue, they're like, let's get some food before. So we're eating pizza like next to the venue, and there's a basketball game on. I'm talking hoops with them. And then the Muscle goes, yeah, it reminds me of the time I did 2 years in the clink for selling Coke. And I'm like, yeah, what does that have to do with basketball? That's what we were talking about. And he was just like, I don't know. I was like, is this guy fucking with me? So we go to the venue, and it's nice venue. It's really well set up. It's pretty. I go up, and first 25 minutes, I'm doing pretty well, but there's a dude who won't stop heckling me the entire set. He's like just nonstop, like every line. And I'm like, dude, I like, at a point where you've put the guy down in every clever way possible. And you're like, at a certain point, you got to toss the guy. It can't, unless you want him to be the whole show. And this place, like, yeah, it looked great, but there's no security. Then I finally, like, at a certain point, I put him down in every clever way possible. I go, listen, you fucking Neanderthal, like, get the fuck out or shut the fuck up. Pick one, And he gets up, and he's the biggest dude I've ever seen. He's like literally a linebacker build, but he's like 6'7". And I'm like, oh my God, fuck. All right. So he starts walking toward the stage. And in my head, I'm like, I'm used to security. I'm like, someone will stop him. But no one stops him. And I'm like, are you kidding? So I'm like, fuck this shit. I walk off stage. I'm like, later, guys. I'm getting booed. Booed. I'm in the green room. Some woman runs back. She's like, what are you doing? There's a show. You can't just do that. I was like, what do you want me to fight him? Like, this is crazy. And she had asked me, I remember she's like, what do you, and I said, I'm not going to fight the guy. And she said, well, what do you plan to do? I was like, I don't know, but have you ever done comedy? And she said, no. And I was like, have you ever been punched in the face? And she said, no. And I was like, both have happened to me. So I feel like qualified to have this, conversation. I'm hearing boos, and she's like, you got to go back out there. And I'm like, I'm not going back out. That guy's a fucking animal. Fuck this city. And I don't realize I'm holding the mic still. It's a cordless mic. So the crowd hears me say all this. The boos intensify. They hate me. And then this dude is like banging on the door. She's locked the door somehow. 7 of the longest minutes ever go by. The 2 guys opening for me are staring at me, like shaking their head, like, what the fuck is this guy in for? Or what's wrong with him, I get that sense sometimes that people think I'm being a diva. And I'm like, I literally only left because I thought violence was impending. I'm not, know. So he finally leaves, and I go back out. I do like another 30 minutes or so. And it was a work. And I remember the biggest laugh I said at a certain point was someone yells out, he's waiting for you in the parking lot. And I was like, you're doing a shit gig when from the stage you have to plan an escape route. That's, that was like one of the biggest laughs. And I was like, man, this gig sucked. So they had to sneak me out to the train. And
oh my God.
And I remember like a year later, I'm watching Family Guy. And I guess he's from, the New England area. And he goes, one of the jokes was something like, man, one of those morons from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And then he just turns to the camera and goes, oh, what are you going to do? Write a letter? And it was just a guy who was a little slow being like, hi, I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm like, oh, maybe people from that area don't love them. So, that was a tough gig. Although I've performed there since. And it's still work, but it's better. I mean, the stress factory there is better for sure.
Dude, it's insane that like I've talked about this with other comics. We talk about it a lot, and unfortunately it continues to come up. Like, there are so many venues that there are a lot of venues that get it right, and you're like, this is great. But there are a
Yeah.
lot of venues where you're like, I am 100% on my own here. Like, there is no one that has my back in this whole
Oh,
place.
God,
You
I'm not a
know?
fucking. All these LA comics are like MMA guys, and I'm like, yeah, New York comics were drunk, so we're like, we don't know how to fight, dude. I mean, we can
Right.
take a hit, I guess, because we're drunk, but like all those LA guys are like, you're in the green room, they're like doing Tai Chi or some shit. We're just like, what? You guys are ready for this. We're not, you know?
Right. Dude, it's
Like you
insane.
kind of wish that dude did that to, although that guy ain't doing that to Brendan Schaub, you know?
Oh my God, he would kill him.
That's
I mean, he would put him in like a triangle choke and the show would be over for
it
a
would be
different
awesome.
reason.
Yeah.
I also, it's wild that like that this is what happens at work for you. You know,
Right.
like when you think about it, you're like, this is my job.
All
And
right.
today at work, someone tried to attack me at my job and I had to leave secretly. You know,
Isn't that crazy?
it's
Yeah, it's
wild.
funny. Yes, you have to explain to your friends too, because no one looks at this as a real job. They just think all your friends do is like, well, clearly you get drunk every night. And I'm like, I can't because I have to write new jokes. So they'll meet you, and it's like that's their night for getting hammered.
Right.
And they're like mad that I'm not on board. And I say, I'll have a few drinks with you, but this is your night. This is my life.
Right.
You can't
Every
just,
night.
you give into that. You're just a different comic. You're that comic who's doing the same 15 minutes, bouncing around the city if you're hammered every night.
Well, it's also funny that people, when they talk to you about comedy, I'm sure you've had this before. It's like, I could only do it if I was drunk. And it's like, yeah, well,
Yeah,
how long do you think that career is going to run? You know?
exactly. Oh, I know. Someone said that to me last night, actually. I'd have to be drunk. And I was like, yeah, well, all right. But then there's like two comics that have pulled that off
Right.
with longevity. And I
Right.
can guess what? I have a feeling you ain't one of them. So
Yeah. Right.
I
If
feel
I
I'd
don't know
have to
you
be
by
drunk.
now, you know?
I get it. Like for the first, I mean, dude, I used to drink early on just out of nerves, but now it's more kind of like, don't fuck this. Have one at most. Don't
Right.
fuck up the flow here. Although the late shows, when you're doing 5 or 6 spots in a night in the city, and by the time you get to like a 1 a.m. cellar spot, you're like, what am I not going to drink? I mean, they're all hammered. This seems unfair if I don't have a couple. So that's like the one time. But if I'm on the road doing an hour, hell no, I can't.
Dude, have you done those like on the road, those like 11 o'clock, 11:30 starts? Just, I
Sure.
mean, oh,
Yeah, I have. It's unreal. I did a club once and I won't mention the name because they banned me anyway. But they banned me because I was like, this is insane that you're starting late. I'm getting like tweets, fuck you. you
right,
know?
right.
Uh and then I have to go on for a shit-faced crowd. I'm going on stage at like 12:15 at night for it's not like a 12:15 in New York where they're like, bars close at 4 and you're like, all right. I mean, they did at one point in the city.
Yeah.
Now it's like fucking, I may as well live in Westchester at this point, the way the city's shutting down. But yeah, you go on at like 12:15 for a town where it's like, this is late for this town.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's brutal. You just have to deal with. You're a babysitter. I feel like a substitute teacher up there.
Right, right. When you got banned from this club, was it mid like show or was it after you were done with the weekend?
No, end of the weekend, and one of the sweetest parts was I could tell he was pissed at me, but I also am like, you've done a bad job with
Right.
this. And he had to pay me bonuses, which was pretty sweet too. Well, I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, well, I did my part,
Right.
Uh, but yeah, no, he was pissed. I could tell, and it's one of the things where you kind of give notes throughout the weekend, like, hey, this would be much better if you did this, and they're kind of like, yeah, but we have our way of doing things, and you're like, so you don't care about just admit you don't care about the show.
Right.
I'll give you an
Right.
example. One is a blowjob shot before I have to go on stage, which is I guess people pay money to go on stage and put their hands behind their back and take a shot. And and it's kind of like, yeah, this is not good for the show. I don't know if you realize this is not helping the show. Another thing that doesn't help the show is you starting, as you said, an hour late.
Right.
And me
Right.
gently saying this and you getting furious about it. It's kind of like, all right, well, I don't need to come back, I guess.
Oh my God. There's so many just people that don't know, and you try to gently, just the gentlest of nudges. And they're like, we've been doing this for 25 years like this. And then you're like, oh, well, it's always like, and you've only worked here, huh? Well, that makes sense.
Right.
Like
I
you've never
exactly. And it's
been anywhere else.
yeah, you're right. It's funny when we've been doing this 25 years. I'm like, cool. If it started 25 years ago, maybe take another look at it. Like, not
Right.
everything not everything from like 80s comedy is still working today. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing I remember there was a club in Milwaukee, which I don't even think it's there anymore. I'd be shocked if
The
they
Comedy
survived.
Cafe?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been there.
Oh man, that I don't know if the guy was running it when you were there, but when I was there, it was in like an industrial like building that you would be for like a rave, and the
Yeah, I think
stage
that
was
was it.
really high. And I remember getting there and the manager, owner, whatever was like, what's your drink? You want to take a shot? You want to rip some shots? And I was at first it was like, this guy is cool. This guy
And he
might be the
charged and he charged you for the shots?
charge me. Not only did he charge me for the shots, but he was just getting hammered. And then the shows were horrible. Like
Yeah.
I was opening and I was having to go on stage, stop an iPod that was plugged into the sound system, and then start the show. And
So funny. Milwaukee should have a good club too, because Milwaukee's low key a pretty cool city.
yeah,
Uh, so it's weird. It's weirdly kind of a beautiful city when you walk around downtown. You're like, this is kind of nice. But
right.
um, yeah, I was there once, and I remember in between shows, I asked the guy opening for me, I said, hey, do you want to go get some Chinese food or something? They didn't have food at the club, and he said, sure. So we come back, and I remember the manager just lost it on him. He's like, where the fuck were you? And I was like, oh, it was my fault. I asked if we want to get food, as I'm I want to make sure we get back in time. And he's like, no, 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 this is between me and him. I was like, oh, this is the most clear. This dude just needs all the power he can get
100%.
and just
Yeah.
wanted to take this. He knew like I'd be like, oh fuck you, I'm not going on then. I'm gonna leave. But
Right.
he was like, I can get away with it on this dude. And I was just laughing. I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Dude, it's crazy. There's just so many lunatics. I want to ask you about like you've had these moments in shithole clubs, I'm sure, where you're like, this sucks, whatever,
Yeah.
as long as I don't get punched. But you've probably had some moments where it's like, and I think it's all relative to where you're at in your career. Like every big moment is like the biggest moment you've had at that point,
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't go well. Have you ever had sort of that you're like, this is it, this is sort of my next big shot that doesn't go well, and you're like, will I bounce back from this?
Sure. It's funny. I used to look at it that way. Now it's funny because if you're a dude, you should be more nervous on a date than you are a late night set at this point,
Right,
because
right,
a date is more likely to ruin your life than one mediocre Fallon appearance,
right.
Uh I mean, I would say first Conan said I did. I didn't think it was going to be like a game changer, but the crowd was so bad. I
Mm-hmm.
remember like, man, whoever you follow on Conan makes such a big difference. I remember I followed an actress, Lizzie Kaplan, who, it wasn't like a great interview. It was just not like a super funny interview. So the crowd was a little stiff. And then I come out telling like, I guess for that setting, 5 p.m. in Burbank, dark-ish jokes. I thought it was, it was approved for late night,
Right.
but yeah, I was pretty upset with the reaction. I still see some of those jokes. I'm like, man, those deserved way more. That's crazy. That was a fight. But then the next time I did Conan, I followed Bill Burr, and it's like, man, what a sweet follow. He's just nothing I'm gonna say is gonna make them clutch their pearls after Burr, because he just will say whatever, and
Right.
he just murdered. He was great.
That's so wild to now. You've moved past it. You don't, you're not looking back and like, I that Conan set ruined me. But in the moment, like when you the talk about like the exact moment you get off stage, you get off of your first. Is this your first late night set at the time?
Yeah, yeah, the first one. And I remember Mark Norman. He was always one of the first people I talked to about that stuff because he cared so much about late night sets and
Yeah.
took them so seriously. I remember the next day he said the crowd was bad, but the jokes were great. And he
Yeah.
like he'd keep it real with me, where he's like the jokes speak louder, man. Would you rather have had mediocre jokes and a fucking hot crowd? I mean, who cares? He said I have friends back home who were like, this guy's got good jokes. He's like, that's what you want. And he said next time the crowd will be better, and they were. I mean, sometimes that's the tough thing about late night sets, and I've always said this: like people are dying to get on late night, not like they used to. I'm not back in now; they're not really because like it's more just like this is cool. I did this, but
Mm-hmm.
you're getting like a 5 p.m. crowd. Like this is a 5 p.m. PG crowd. This is not
Right.
ideal for comedy. This is not an ideal setup. I've had some rough late night sets. That's just what it is. You're going into not a good environment. Everyone thinks like you're gonna get a standing O or something. It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a younger comic than you are now, did it shake you a little bit? Or were you
I
talk
was
to
more
Mark and you
angry.
sort
I
of
wasn't shaken. I was kind of like, man, I waited so long. I was the last of any of my friends to get on late night. You know, my crew of comics coming up. Joe List had done Letterman. Normand had done Conan. Phil Hanley had done, I think, two Fergusons at that point. Yeah, most of my friends had done late night. So I was a little bit like, when you have everything in comedy, you either get it too early or way too late.
Yeah,
There's
right.
very few people who are like, so I was like 8.5 years in, I think, when I did Conan. I was kind of like, it's about fucking time.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I was more angry than I was because when that you got to fake it. It's not like a club. You can be like you can go into the crowd and start shitting on them. It's TV. Most people don't know that I'm not doing as well as I want to be. It's more about me. So I remember my first joke, which I still think is like a really strong. It was like a on purpose joke. It was self-deprecating. It had a lot of punchlines because I was like, well, if the first line or two doesn't get him, I'll get a big pop by the end, and
Right.
it just didn't do that great. And I was kind of like really in my head kind of like this is so yeah, I think I had to fake a smile through a lot of that set, and I was in my head pretty angry. you know
God, that is such a unique feeling, I think, to comics where you in your head you can feel it like not going as well as you want. And you're like,
Sure.
but you can't show it because the minute you show it, you lose whatever you have, you know?
Oh god, I mean, I've in specials I'll say, guys, this is a tape. I'll break it up because if they're terrible, which that's happened too, and you have to be like, guys, come on. But if it's late night, that's the other thing about late night, which I'm not crazy about anymore. uh you flub a line. It's just there. It's kind of like ridiculous. You're like, I like editing my own comedy. I didn't even like when I did a half hour for Comedy Central, they got to edit it. They're editing shit I don't want edited that way. To me, that's insane. Like, can you imagine making a movie and having no say in the editing process at
Right.
all?
Right.
I mean, there's a way we've worked on telling this, and then they cut certain lines. I'm like, you just cut a line for time. That was an important line. So uh yeah, I like kind of doing it my own way at this point,
Yeah,
or at least a place that'll give me control.
right, and it doesn't seem to have affected you to do it your own way. You know, it doesn't seem to have hindered you at all.
It's a lot of
Uh,
work though. It is, I've had a few comics. I talked to Mark Norman yesterday. I was like, man, we had lunch yesterday, and we laugh at like these old school comics who are like, we had it so much harder than you guys. And I'm like, did you have to format videos and caption videos? And like some of these guys were like, we had it harder. I mean, you toured with the same hour for a decade, dude.
right,
You
yeah, you were in the
didn't
Catskills for 6 months. You know,
but then you remember they didn't have cell phones. You're like, they might have had it a little harder.
yeah, right,
That's the
right.
one area where you're like, that would have been tough just to be on the road.
It did seem like though, like those older, that sort of heyday, golden year, whatever you want to call it, those kind of comics. It did just seem like everybody was just popping. Like, like
I
there was
know.
such a rush of comedy. And now
I had
you're
I had a
like,
manager tell
God.
us once, me and a few of my friends, he's like, man, if it was 10 years ago, you guys would have been set. If like late night sets still mattered, if you guys were like 10 years older, you would have been famous by now.
Oh my God.
And I was like, man, that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Because like podcasts are really where it's at now. And I'm more of I just like stand up way more than I like writing. I like
Yeah.
writing stuff. And yeah, you're right though. In the 80s, like you did one Carson, it's kind of like, oh, you're set,
Right.
So yeah, I like that setup for
Yeah.
sure. But it also you couldn't just make your own stuff back then. So you do have to take the good with the bad.
Right. Right. I want to talk a little about. I think this is such a fun thing for comics. The amount of travel that you put in for the return, especially early on, is so it's not a good equation. You know what I mean? Like, what do
Yeah.
you think the farthest you've gone for the least amount of money is?
Okay. I featured for Mark Maron in San Jose, and I probably broke even on the gig,
Yeah, that's
But I wanted
that's
to work with Mark Maron. It's probably like 10 years ago. I just want to watch him and work with him, and it was worth it.
right, right. Yeah, those are moments like that where you're like, this is worth the experience. But I'm sure you've also had those moments where you're like it's 4 hour drive or train or whatever it is, and you made $50 in a drink ticket, and you're just like, what
God,
is
how
going on?
insulting is the drink ticket? It's
Oh
like
my
just
God.
fucking give us just like you're the guy on stage. Here's a drink. How about that?
Right.
You have to sadly hand them a ticket,
Yeah.
like you're at fucking adult Chuck E. Cheese. Come on,
And you
but
can't even get any drink you want. It's like, well, drinks
yeah,
and drafts. They always
yeah,
tell you, God. I
yeah,
love you see the clubs that do the menu of like comics can no longer order the steak,
right,
and it's like
right.
you can't
Bad
even
club.
have a steak.
Those clubs are closing down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? You don't have to name the club, obviously, if they're still in existence. But just, do you have a club weekend where either you were excited to do it and it just completely let you down, or it was just like one of those club weekends where you're like, this is not how this is supposed to work? Just a dog shit weekend.
It's an interesting question. I mean, Naples is the obvious one. I'm trying to think of
Right.
the low key one. I mean, it would probably have to be early on, because most, you know what it is, honestly, it's clubs like I remember. All right, so I'll still play this club. I still like the people who run it and stuff. But Atlanta Punchline,
Mm-hmm.
they want that third show. Clubs that want that third show on a
Yeah.
Saturday, I'm kind of like, dude, it's too much. Like me doing 3 separate hours. I don't mind doing like 2 90-minute shows, but if you want me, I'd rather do that than three. The starting and the stopping is just tough. And yeah, it was pretty brutal. The second two shows I believe sold out, and then the early show was like 15 people, and they were the worst 15 people. And that room is not designed for a small crowd because you can hear the cash register. It was just hell. It was
Right.
a hell gig. And it's one of those gigs where I'm like, do you guys not want to be here? And they're all just like shrugging. I'm like, what the fuck? So that was one where I'm like, I know Atlanta's a great comedy city, so you kind of just expect more. I'm trying to think if there's any other like weekends. I'll go back there though for sure. I was pouty and fucking annoying in the green room. Uh, Most clubs, I mean, I love this enough that I could find the good even in a bad weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Which I think you have to most times.
yeah, you got to learn to love the bad gigs too, because you'll still find shit.
Right. Right. Yeah, and there's so many bad ones that if you didn't like them, you would have quit a long time ago.
But now they're pretty good, honestly. I look at my calendar. I'm like, I'm pretty excited to go pretty much everywhere on my calendar.
Yeah.
It's funny, you'd watch Bourdain or something in your hotel, and Yeah, he goes to a lot of really nice places, but he'd go to some places that weren't as nice, and he'd still find the best part in those cities. And that's kind of
Right.
how you have to approach the road. Is you just have to be like, I'll find a cool diner, or I'll find something, find a cool coffee shop, or I'll look go into a museum. Like do something. I used to be so lazy on the roads, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. So, and I think the last few years I was way better about it, but sometimes you're just tired from the travel and they make you do morning press and stuff. And then you have to do shows at night. So it's hard to be active, but because you also want to listen to the shows and tweak jokes and figure stuff to talk about. But you do feel silly traveling to these great cities. And then it's like, what do you do in San Francisco? And you're like, I just hung out in my hotel and I went to a Bluestone Coffee once or whatever
Right.
in
Yeah. Oh God, I
Bottle,
get
whatever it's
like
called. Yeah.
I'm always just like, is there a Chipotle nearby? Like I never
Chipotle is
adventure
clutch
out.
though for the road because at
Oh,
least
dude.
there's a comfort in knowing what you're gonna get too.
100%, and it's like always consistent. Like I made the mistake once of going. I was in like Greensboro, North Carolina, of going to like the burger place and was sick the rest of the weekend. It was just like never again. I'll go
Well,
to Subway or Chipotle.
that's the problem with their local haunt where they're like too excited. They're like, you got it. You're here once. You got to get the tater tot nachos. And you're like, I got to do 3 shows on a Saturday. What do you think
Right.
I'm going to be able to stand after that shit?
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Before we get out of here, you talked a little about how after your Conan set, you're talking to Mark. What is your sort of coping mechanism after a bad show or bad set or whatever it is? Something doesn't go the way you want it to go. Is it call another comic? Is there a certain food or drink you like to have that sort of just resets you? You know?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it just, I don't have like one method really. I need a minute. Sometimes you're with someone who doesn't do comedy
Yeah, yeah.
and they say things like, "Why don't you just get over it?" And you try to explain, I'm gonna get over it, but I literally just bombed for an hour. I need a minute. You
Right.
need to explain to them like that felt like getting pelted with fucking rocks for an hour.
Yeah.
I need to chill for a sec. So it's tough to be with non-comics after a bomb with like, yeah, but you're good. Who cares? And you're like, well, I'll get over it, but just give me 10 minutes.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, I think just kind of just sometimes the crowd's rough and you're like, yeah, fuck, give me a scotch. I just need something. So you need the brown stuff for a bad one, I think. And then yeah, call or text a friend maybe.
Yeah. Is it
Watch
mostly
something funny
comics
when you
or
get home.
do you venture out into like the regular people circle? Can they understand?
Usually
Can they
comics, because
sympathize? Yeah.
they're the best ones to talk to. They'll tell you a funny story. Rachel Feinstein's one of my best friends. She always has a hilarious story about like she just told me a story that she was in Arizona. Like whatever my story is, she'll like try to top it with she's like, well, I was disrespected worse. And that's like Jewish, that's like New York Jew energy, which I kind of laugh at. It's kind of like, oh, you think you have it bad, listen to this.
Right.
And it's like I call it like Jewish Tai Chi, where
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
take your negative energy and I'm going to show you mine. So she told me a story once that I told her a bomb story on the road. She said, I'm in Arizona and I'm in the green room and I heard someone walking by and say, why are we going to see Rachel Feinstein? She's not funny. And the guy who ran the club just shut the door slowly, hoping she wouldn't hear. But she said it was
My
even more
God.
depressing. So she'll tell me that story, and I'm like, oh, I'm laughing. Like, all right.
Oh man.
There's
That
something
that
about the
is
isolation of the road.
yeah. Yeah, and just feeling that like there's somebody out there that kind of gets what's going on is sometimes a lifesaver, you know.
Yeah, you do feel. I mean, there's a reason you're close to the people you started with, and it's because when they get stuff, you're so happy because you just know what they put in. So,
Yeah, right.
yeah, you need those friends who get it.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for doing this, dude. For the
It was fun, man.
people,
Thank you.
oh, of course. For the people that haven't seen both of your put out 2 specials pretty quick, man. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm out of shit to say though. There's no more specials coming. So
Where can they? I mean, they can see them on YouTube, but tell people where they can see you, where they can find your specials, and where they can find you on social media.
yeah, I'm on all the social media. Just my name, Sam Morril, and you could see me on the road. I'm hitting it back pretty hard, and yeah, specials on YouTube, up on the roof. I got this, and yeah, I'll be hitting it, man.
Right on. Well, thanks for doing this, dude.
Thank you, Colin.